1. He grinned and said, "I make lots of money. On weekdays, I receive an average of 50 orders a day from all over the globe via the internet." 2.
What does your son do?
Well, he used to work for a multinational corporation, but unfortunately he is unemployed at the moment. 3. Guess what? I quit my full-time job last autumn, and at present I'm traveling around the countryside.
You never cease to astonish me.
4. A few buttons are coming loose, so I want you to sew them back on before they come off. I cherish this jacket because it was my late father's. 5. Is Barbie moving to the suburbs?
Believe it or not, she is moving into your neighborhood. You may well bump into her one of these days.
6.
By the way, does anybody know what's become of Jim?
I do. I heard from him the week before last. He said he was earning a living as a guard. 7.
The dollar has strengthened against the major currencies. At the current exchange rate, a dollar is equivalent to 120 yen.
8.
Peggy said to herself, "I've never been to such a boring, horrible party before, but I might as well look like I'm enjoying myself."
9. The blind and deaf person says that he has been struggling for many years, but has now come to terms with his disability. 10. He is normally punctual for appointments. Oh, here he comes. Tony, where on earth have you been? We've been waiting for you for ages. 11. I've had a dull pain in my chest on and off for a couple of days.
Really? That's too bad. Have you seen a proper doctor?
12. This lizard grows really fast. By the time it is a month old, it will have doubled in length, and within 6 months it will have reached as long as 50 centimeters. 13.
The other day, I met Meg Brown for the first time in 3 years. She had changed so much that I didn't recognize her right away.
14. The presidential candidate got off the bus and shook hands in turn with each of his loyal supporters who had cheerfully greeted him. 15.
As the millionaire hadn't drawn up his will, Daniel, his stepson and only heir, inherited his entire estate upon his sudden death.
16. A newspaper editorial implied that the tragic catastrophe had been caused by the workers who had paid little heed to safety procedures. 17.
The crops were doing badly, so the initial outlook was dismal. However, as it turned out, the actual grain harvest surpassed the bleak forecast.
18. As of April 1st, postal rates will rise by 5%. On April 2nd, subway fares will be raised by 10%. Starting April 3rd, my allowance will be reduced by half. 19. I'm hoping for a pay raise. I recently got a master's degree in business administration. It's a qualification that entitles you to a higher salary. 20.
The visitors were due to arrive at the airport in less than 2 hours, but their plane was delayed due to a suspected bomb in the baggage compartment.
21. I'd like to talk to you in person. Are you available on Monday?
Let me check. Monday isn't convenient for me. Any day except Monday will do.
22. It can be summarized as follows. Her so-called boyfriend talked her into bearing a large portion of his debts and then disappeared. 23.
He whispered in my ear, "This has to be an attractive deal for you. Think it over and let me know your answer as soon as possible."
24. The Simpsons were planning to go for a swim over the weekend, but they had to call it off because of rough weather. 25. Can I try it on?
Certainly. Here you are.
It fits perfectly. It goes well with my shirt. What do you think?
You look marvelous. It matches your trousers as well.
26. Lately you've been getting a little lazy.
Well, on the one hand, I know I have to catch up with the others, but on the other, I can barely bring myself to study.
27. According to the magazine article, the once flourishing insurance company went bankrupt as a consequence of a series of poor management decisions. 28. To stay fit, I ride my bike to and from work. What do you do to keep healthy?
Nothing in particular, but I use stairs instead of elevators.
29.
At the exhibition of contemporary sculpture, Beth seemed excited. Pat appeared amazed. Jan looked fascinated. As for myself, I was bored to death.
30. Heavily drunk, I mistook the contents of the glass for white wine and swallowed the thick liquid in one gulp. It tasted awful. It was olive oil. 31.
At the academic conference, Dr. Adams of the XYZ Institute attributed changes in the climate to global warming and pollution of the atmosphere.
32. An anonymous informer provided Scotland Yard with the whereabouts of the criminals who were wanted for theft and armed robbery. 33.
"It's on fire! Hurry up and put it out!" she yelled, but a delivery van parked in the way prevented the fire engine from passing through the alley.
34. I must confess that at first I was highly suspicious of the peculiar herbal remedy, but it cured me dramatically of my chronic sense of fatigue. 35.
In conclusion, let me offer you a piece of advice. Learn a whole phrase or sentence by heart rather than memorize each word separately from the context.
36. The biology teacher explained, generally speaking, female mammals do not lay eggs, but give birth to babies and feed them breast milk. 37.
How I have longed to possess a jewel such as this.
How gorgeous! Was it expensive?
I got it for free. My fiancé gave it to me as a token of his love.
38. A friend of mine found this instruction manual for me, but it has quite a few unfamiliar terms in it, so I got myself a reference book to look up their definitions. 39.
I asked her a slightly personal question out of mere curiosity, but she took it as an implicit insult and became furious with me.
40. The grim-faced sergeant commanded in a voice of wrath, "Be alert. It's a matter of life and death. A moment's hesitation will cost you your life." 41.
Kindergarten children were singing in chorus the joyful, lively song, "I wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year."
42.
I'm glad I've met a smart, sincere man at last.
I'm afraid you have yet to meet Mr. Right. I find Bob shallow and dishonest. You are mistaken about him. 43. A relief fund was recently established for the victims of the quake that devastated the town and left numerous people homeless. 44.
First I married a dentist, and then I divorced him after 6 months, and now I'm engaged to a lawyer.
I'll keep my fingers crossed. 45. I'm sorry to keep you waiting. I'll be there in half an hour. I'll buy you lunch to make up for this.
It's okay. There's no hurry, so take your time.
46. The thermometer registered 96 degrees Fahrenheit. I could use a cold beer, muttered someone. We had beads of sweat dripping from our foreheads. 47.
I had practiced my Italian, so I thought I could communicate to some extent, but I couldn't make myself understood at all.
48. He bowed, thanked me for sparing the time to visit, and said, "The place is a mess, but please take a seat and make yourself at home." 49. She really gets on my nerves. He frowned. Nobody could stop her from chattering. She is, as it were, an eternal chatterbox that drives everybody crazy. 50.
I assigned the complex, challenging task to Greg. In light of his ample experience as a troubleshooter, I considered him to be the best suited to it.
51. The Prime Minister announced the Commerce Act will enable domestic steel mills to compete on equal terms with their foreign counterparts. 52. What was the outcome of the preliminary talks? Did you get them to agree to our plan?
It was flatly rejected. We couldn't convince them to accept it.
53. After all, radical reformers tried in vain to persuade the conservative leadership to carry out bold health care reforms. 54.
They allow us to use their harbor on the condition that our cargo vessel transports up to 5 tons of their freight for each trip free of charge.
55. Chocolate, chewing gum, and batteries are usually on sale beside checkout counters to encourage shoppers to buy them on impulse. 56.
The Education Ministry called on high schools to place more emphasis on listening comprehension and conversational skills in English.
57. The lung cancer had spread to other organs. He was just given injections and medicines in order to help him cope with his aches and pains. 58.
His mansion is furnished with many pieces of exquisite furniture, and every other week his servant polishes them to make them shine.
59. The imaginative kids made believe they were shrewd private detectives, and they searched the vacant building for clues to solve the imaginary mystery. 60.
There's a small crack in the roof of the tool shed and it leaks, so I'm going to have my husband mend it before the rainy season sets in.
61.
Ted doesn't let me work part-time, nor does he permit me to go out by myself on his days off.
It sounds as if you are living in the feudal era. 62. A big intimidating man turned up and then grasped me by the lapels. "I'll make you pay even if you don't want to." I had no choice but to obey him. 63.
How much does it cost to have a flat tire repaired?
As far as I can remember, it costs at least £10. You might want to fix it yourself. 64. Uncle Bob's drugstore was broken into last month, so he took precautions. He had a burglar alarm and a surveillance camera installed. 65. If we are to get our recycling project accepted by manufacturing firms, we need to get many more people to take part in our nationwide campaign. 66.
Dr. Gold holds her fellow professor in contempt. I have heard her say at times, he may be something of a celebrity, but he is not much of a scholar.
67.
To my horror, I saw a toddler slip and fall off the edge of the vertical cliff, and to my great relief, it was but a dream.
68. As a child, he mused, I derived great pleasure from watching bullet trains come and go against the background of Mount Fuji. 69.
I saw drunken Rick swearing and cursing. He appeared to have stumbled on a curb and hit his forehead and elbow against a trash can.
70. The foreman said, "We felt ourselves betrayed by the owner when we found out by chance that he had intended to sell our factory and run away." 71. I often hear it said that only a handful of high-ranking officials in that division play a dominant role in shaping the fiscal policy of our country. 72.
I was wandering around in the cathedral when I heard the hymn, "The Lord is my shepherd," being sung by a choir in the chapel.
73. The ruling party was sharply split by internal strife, so an emergency session was called to reconcile the hostile factions. 74. Are you a freshman?
No, I'm a sophomore.
What's your major?
I'm majoring in French literature and architecture. I'm interested in French art.
75. How about Jill? Is she for or against abortion?
She's a devout Catholic. She's opposed to it under any circumstances. What about yourself?
76. The following chapter is mainly concerned with the beneficial influence of moderate exercise on health and well-being. 77.
The voluntary organization has been highly praised for its consistent effort to create a fair and just society by getting rid of racism and sexism.
78. The survey results have already been transmitted to headquarters, where all the data are now being processed and analyzed. 79.
I was robbed of my purse, and to make matters worse, it contained my passport, wallet, and credit cards, everything essential for my trip.
80. In those days, the Japanese were mocked overseas. They were looked upon as a nation of workaholics preoccupied with economic prosperity. 81.
The reckless driver was stopped for speeding at nearly 100 miles per hour in his Porsche. He was fined £100 and had his driver's license suspended.
82. The collapse of the communist regime allowed Western journalists access to the sort of information that they had been denied before. 83.
Their exceptional success was made possible in part by their innovative corporate strategy and in part by their advantageous geographical position.
84. Needless to say, I was envious of Mick, for he was considered indispensable to the team, and I was seen as a nuisance and a burden. 85.
A column of vapor was seen rising from the crater several hours before the volcano erupted. Now we see a huge volume of lava flowing down.
86.
The janitor was fired merely a week after he was hired. He was discovered trying to crack the safe to steal the money and valuables in it.
87. I was what they call a juvenile delinquent. I was caught shoplifting and expelled from school. I was arrested for assault and vandalism. 88.
I hear that formerly miners in this deserted village were made to work as slaves and that they lived in crude, primitive surroundings.
89. None of those youngsters have been heard to utter a firm thank you. Furthermore, they don't even have the courtesy to say please. 90. Sue and I were supposed to have a terrific vacation, but instead we had a terrible row over trifles and finally broke up. 91. Besides the mortgage loan and the charges for water, gas, electricity, and so on, we are supposed to pay income and consumption tax. 92.
Public servants are expected to meet the needs of every citizen, regardless of their race, sex, creed, and social status.
93. What with one thing and another, I forgot to reserve a table for tomorrow night. The chances are the restaurant is fully booked by now. 94.
Write an essay on whether or not the death penalty should be abolished. Remember to go over your paper for spelling errors before you hand it in.
95. What is your main priority?
We aim to pursue our ultimate goal of equal opportunities for minorities at the expense of short-term needs.
96. In the face of overwhelming odds, the Imperial Navy managed to win the decisive battle thanks to the Admiral's skillful tactics. 97. The earnest, inflexible police officer declared, "My duty is to ensure that the law is obeyed, so I am careful not to overlook any trivial offense." 98.
In the beginning, I resolved not to give in, but in the end, I yielded to his repeated requests to purchase a brand new motorcycle.
99. Apparently, the border incident was intended to coincide with the festival to celebrate the second anniversary of our independence. 100.
The black population gave a shriek of delight when the former prisoner became the first black person to be elected president in South Africa.
101. The weakness of the UN was revealed in yet another futile attempt to work out a peaceful solution to the regional warfare. 102.
I have 2 infants to look after. I change their diapers and wipe off spilled food all day long, day after day. It's so tiring that you need infinite patience.
103. We're going shopping in Walmart. Would you like to join us?
I'd love to, but the thing is, I have some urgent business to attend to.
104. Municipal governments are independent of central government in the selection of sites on which to build waste disposal centers. 105.
The man in black stopped to light a cigarette, pondered for a second, then turned around and began to trot in the opposite direction.
106. The chemistry teacher took great pains to illustrate the meaning of the complicated formula by using a diagram and laboratory apparatus. 107.
The traveler dozed off on a bench in the tranquil square. After a while, he woke up to find that his luggage had vanished without a trace.
108. Longevity runs in my family. My great-grandfather lived to be 102. My grandfather is still active for a man approaching 90, and I have never fallen ill. 109.
The locally organized rescue party set off at dawn in search of the missing hikers, only to come back empty-handed at dusk.
110. Sorry to interrupt, but we're now discussing what it takes to curb tax evasion. Please confine your statements to the subject in question. 111.
Chris was awfully upset to learn that his wife had passed away, yet he was courageous enough not to exhibit his grief in our presence.
112. I keep in touch with a distant relative who runs a pawn shop. He said he was very fortunate to acquire a valuable china ornament for next to nothing. 113.
It's up to you, Tim. You are responsible for the puppy and the kitten. I'm too busy to take care of them, okay?
Sure, you can count on me. 114. Puffing and panting, Joe groaned, "Could you slow down a bit? I'm out of breath, and I can't run fast enough to keep up with you." 115. What's keeping you? I'm very anxious to get there on time. The tickets will be sold out soon.
I can't decide which sweater I should wear.
116. Little by little, the housewife grew weary of doing monotonous household chores and was eager to seek something more stimulating. 117.
He is easy to offend and impossible to please. He is rather difficult to get along with, to say the least.
A good boss is hard to come by. 118.
How do you like this condo?
To be honest, it leaves a lot to be desired. The price is relatively high, and what's more, it's badly located. 119.
Do you think of me as a nobody? To tell you the truth, I'm sick and tired of just serving tea, answering the phone, photocopying, and so forth, day in, day out.
120. That secretary is proud, among other things, of her remarkable linguistic ability. She speaks Spanish and Italian fluently, to say nothing of English. 121.
At the time, dense fog restricted visibility to 10 meters, so motorists couldn't even make out traffic lights, not to mention road signs.
122. The smugglers are alleged to have earned no less than $300,000 per person from the forbidden sale of ivory and lumber. 123.
I heard the malicious rumor was circulated by a former employee who is said to have held a grudge against the employer for dismissing him.
124. The psychiatrist said, his mental illness seems to have been induced by the long-term stress of dealing exclusively with customers' complaints. 125.
Preserving our cultural heritage is of utmost importance. Likewise, it is most important to hand down our traditional values from generation to generation.
126. Would you mind lending me some money? I'm short of cash.
You already owe me $80. This time, you will pay it back with interest.
127.
He made a solemn vow to give up gambling, but before long he violated that pledge, and I will not put up with him any longer.
128. This is what I did to lose weight. First, I took up swimming, and second, I avoided eating between meals, and lastly, I cut down on high-calorie foods. 129.
The ambitious general conquered the kingdom and ascended the throne. The monarch escaped being executed, but was banished for life.
130. I can't help thinking she isn't fit for a teaching job. It is true her English is excellent, but when it comes to teaching, she's a little too self-righteous. 131.
Originally, the suspect denied ever being involved in conspiracy to murder, but afterward, conscience compelled him to admit it.
132. She is such a calm, refined lady that I can't possibly imagine her using such foul, vulgar language.
I guess she was temporarily insane.
133. You can't take advantage of your position as a woman now. I remember your objecting to being treated as one.
I don't remember saying that.
134. I'll never forget feeling so nervous on that job interview. While waiting my turn, I was so tense I could feel my heart beating in my throat. 135.
I ran out of patience and told him, "You are not too particular about what you wear, so why don't you try wearing a different tie for a change?"
136. After reviewing our present mode of operation, the consultant pointed out that it needed modifying to reflect the conditions facing us. 137. The respected physicist emphasized the necessity of increasing the quality of science education in primary and secondary schools. 138.
Kate insisted on giving me English lessons in exchange for my teaching her the art of flower arrangement and the rituals of the tea ceremony.
139. Instead of responding submissively to our reproach, he came up with an elaborate, contradictory excuse to justify his conduct. 140.
I'm not accustomed to handling such delicate cases, so I don't know if I can carry on with this.
Don't worry. Sooner or later you'll get used to it. 141. In addition to being a noted philosopher, Professor Scott is a distinguished authority on Greek legends, folk tales, myths, and fables. 142.
When he contemplated committing suicide, he was in the depths of despair at the prospect of never regaining his reputation again.
143. The papers denounced the Premier for not having taken any effective measures to help reverse the gradual decline in people's standard of living. 144.
A sightseeing bus pulled up in front of the railroad station, picked up dozens of tourists, and pulled out into heavy traffic.
145. In the exciting adventure game, the player starts in neutral territory, penetrates the floating castle, and hunts for the hidden treasures. 146.
I had a terrifying nightmare. One ugly monster after another emerged from the bushes, and my legs were trapped in mud.
147. An investigating committee was hastily set up to look into the election fraud involving the governor and his closest aides. 148.
The competent principal hit upon a novel and sensible approach to the perpetual problem confronting his elementary school.
149. Lawmakers have just started deliberating the new legislation banning the possession of firearms. There is still a long way to go before it is implemented. 150.
Our point of view regarding conservation is entirely different from that of Americans. However, they tend to think we have the same perspective as they do.
151.
The casual remark the mayor made concerning ethnic minorities provoked a lot of dismay, outrage, and criticism from all sides.
152. The historian said, "These funny satires were inspired by the hypocrisy of the detested dictator who pretended that everything was in order." 153. The principal focus of the newly introduced educational program is on cultivating and developing pupils' mental and critical faculties. 154.
It seemed likely that the waste buried in the drained swamps would contaminate the soil, but that information was withheld from area residents.
155. This military base accommodates various facilities, including 2 separate underground silos designed to withstand any nuclear attacks. 156.
Here are examples of arithmetic calculations. 2.5 multiplied by 4 equals 10. 7 divided by 3 is 2 with a remainder of 1.
157. Similarly, fall in tax revenue resulted in a cut in public expenditure, which in turn caused great hardship for the construction industry. 158.
Developed countries imposed sanctions, mostly import restrictions, on Iraq for invading and occupying its affluent neighbor.
159. Looking back on days gone by, Kenny said, "This is where I hung out a lot. These photos remind me of the joys and sorrows of my adolescence. 160.
It was a dream come true. After many years of endeavor, the hard-working engineers invented an epoch-making electronic device.
161. I'm having a hard time talking them out of fighting a custody battle. Neither of them is willing to part with their 5-year-old son. 162.
The humble priest spent the rest of his life caring for the poor, the sick, and the disabled in a number of developing countries.
163. Whistling his favorite theme tune, the stout man took off his underwear, wrapped a towel around his waist, and got into the sauna. 164.
Leaving their children behind by themselves, they traveled on foot to the Mediterranean coast and headed by sea for their native land.
165.
"Look out!" I cried out, in spite of myself, when a boy chasing a ball ran out in front of a speeding dump truck and came close to being run over.
166. Emma was so late getting back. I paced back and forth in the lobby waiting for her to come back. I was worried something might have happened to her. 167. I deliberately flattered her on her hairstyle and attire, hoping and praying that her attention would be distracted from the blunder I had made. 168.
Seconds after its spectacular launch, the spacecraft with 7 astronauts on board blew up and came apart, striking the viewers dumb with shock.
169. A truck loaded with sacks of wheat and beans skidded on the slippery road and flipped onto its side, completely obstructing the freeway. 170.
Eddie startled me by tapping me on the shoulder. Absorbed in my reading, I didn't notice him sneaking in. He frequently plays such childish pranks.
171. The naughty student, accompanied by his strict father, came to the teacher's room and apologized to us for his rudeness and bad behavior. 172.
Contrary to what we had expected, the jury returned a unanimous verdict of not guilty, and the defendant, embraced by his attorney, wept with joy.
173. The bridesmaid read out the telegrams of congratulations, followed by the best man, who proposed a toast to the bride and groom. 174.
Compared with Bill and Sam, Ken is very considerate. He always stands by me, and whenever I feel like grumbling, he is ready to listen.
175.
Fishermen refer to the tiny rocky island as Gunboat Island because seen from a distance, it somewhat resembles a battleship.
176. Don't quote me on this, but judging from his speech at the board meeting, the CEO's disposition is not optimistic. It is, if anything, on the pessimistic side. 177. The sales figures in the third quarter were fairly good, but considering the market growth, there was still plenty of room for improvement. 178.
Having withdrawn most of his savings from his bank deposit, the wealthy landowner had a considerable amount of money at his disposal.
179. The dedicated coach, having trained the promising runner for the past few years, seems delighted with the steady progress she has made up to now. 180.
Never having treated a wounded soldier, the male nurse passed out at the sight of one covered with blood and didn't recover consciousness for a while.
181. True to his word, the athletic genius performed an astonishing feat with ease. He broke 3 world records by wide margins. 182.
Frantic with worry, he told the cruel kidnapper that he was prepared to pay any ransom, provided that the release of his loved ones was assured.
183. Unable to suppress his feelings, he exclaimed, "How rotten he is! I would rather go without food and drink than borrow money from that sly old devil." 184.
Dot was standing in the corner with her arms folded and her eyes closed. With no one paying any attention to her, she felt lonely and out of place.
185. With opening night just around the corner, 20-odd members of staff were busy assembling the stage equipment. 186.
Eyes wide open, the curious boy kept gazing at a cricket as it stopped chirping, made its way to the puddle, and leaped over it.
187. The latest statistics show that the number of crimes in the urban districts of this country, far from decreasing, is on the increase again. 188.
All but a few of them doubted that the bold and daring explorers could overcome the formidable obstacles and conduct a successful expedition to the Antarctic.
189. I can tell from this score that he is continuing to make an effort to improve his English.
I suspect he either cheated or got the score by accident.
190. It was so brightly colored that I didn't feel comfortable. I recommended he change it to create a quieter atmosphere to suit the taste of elderly people. 191.
The annual study released Wednesday requested that far more resources be devoted to the care of needy refugees to ease their distress.
192. A good many city dwellers were frustrated that they couldn't afford to rent a decent apartment in central Tokyo, let alone own a house. 193.
I am bitterly disappointed and shocked that a majority of the delegates didn't vote for the bill to protect endangered species from extinction.
194. The trouble with the peasants toiling in those barren fields was that they were not familiar with the basic concept of irrigation. 195.
The fact is, I'm not on good terms with Debbie. I run into her once in a while on campus, but we seldom exchange greetings.
196. With regard to your recent inquiry, I'm pleased to inform you that the other party has finally agreed to settle out of court. 197.
The President told the Assembly of Diligent Workers that he took great pride in them and that, in the long run, their efforts would be amply rewarded.
198. The accountant ordered his assistant to look over the figures in the books to see if there were any obvious errors or missing items. 199.
All of a sudden, I became uncertain as to whether or not I had chosen the right clothes and cancelled the order, but I was charged a cancellation fee.
200. Have you checked the instrument panel?
Yes, but I can't figure out what's wrong. Maybe it's an electrical failure.
Operated manually. 201.
A few passengers intervened between a streetcar driver and a cab driver quarreling over who was to blame for a minor collision.
202. Information technologies, known as IT, are advancing so rapidly that ordinary people have no idea what it will be like 5 years from now. 203. What do you think makes them competitive?
For the most part, it's because they spend substantial sums of money on research and development.
204. I went on a trip to rural Iran. The landscape was beautiful beyond comparison. What made the scenery second to none were the paddy fields. 205.
As a matter of fact, what you described as Chinese characteristics apply not only to the Chinese, but also other Asian peoples.
206.
There he goes again, trying to impress others with what he calls his extensive knowledge of Oriental cuisine.
He really loves to show off. 207. After being presented with the award, the director expressed his gratitude. I owe what I am today to my wonderful staff. I can't thank them enough. 208.
When the misery of dying children was broadcast, I was filled with so much sympathy that I decided to donate what little money I had to charity.
209. Do you realize this is a particularly crucial moment? Inquired the Secretary of State. Whatever we do now will determine the destiny of this administration. 210. The vigorous old man said, I welcome whoever wishes to come, so do bring as many pals as you can, the more the merrier. 211.
Kyoto, the ancient capital famous for its old temples and shrines, lies to the north of Osaka and some 500 kilometers to the west of Tokyo.
212. The economics textbook says inflation, that is, a general rise in the prices of goods and services, results from an excess of demand over supply. 213.
The thesis covered all phases of the glories and triumphs of civilization and omitted a less prominent factor, i.e., the psychology of the masses.
214. All living creatures depend for their existence on the chemical elements of oxygen and hydrogen. In a word, they can't exist without water. 215.
Astronomers are convinced of the theory that the universe came into being and evolved as a result of a massive explosion.
216. The clergyman was barred from addressing the political rally on the grounds that he might add fuel to revolutionary sentiments and start a revolt. 217.
Medical scientists came to more or less the same conclusion that a certain virus, by destroying specific cells, brings about the rare fatal disease.
218. The immense bronze statue was erected as a memorial to the heroic statesman who sacrificed his life for the sake of democracy. 219.
I'm deeply concerned about millions of potential addicts who are not in the least aware of the grave dangers of drug and alcohol abuse.
220. A large number of people participated in the Peace March calling for the abolition of weapons that are capable of causing mass destruction. 221.
The U.S. Congress, which corresponds to the British Parliament or the Japanese Diet, consists of the House and the Senate.
222. Some religious bodies resented the genetic engineering experiment that the chemists were engaged in to test their hypothesis. 223.
This is the most mysterious phenomenon that I have ever observed, and it could have far-reaching implications for the ecology of this region.
224. The attached form will save you a lot of trouble when registering. All you have to do is confirm your address, fill in the relevant blanks, and put your signature to it. 225.
They called him a liar, which he was not. They accused him of being selfish, which he was not either. He was really not the kind of person he was thought to be.
226. An MC, which is short for Master of Ceremonies, is a person whose duty is to see that a certain formal social event takes place according to schedule. 227.
She insisted that those single mothers, all of whom were badly off and had trouble providing for their children, deserved better welfare benefits.
228.
I understand that children brought up overseas have difficulty adapting to life in this society, which requires them to conform.
229. I imitated a variety of dialects to amuse the teenage girls, who chuckled and made fun of my desperate attempt to entertain them. 230. Dick said in an indignant tone of voice, "In short, it's their fault, not mine, which is why I'm under no obligation to pay for the damage." 231.
The woman writer sought to arouse widespread sympathy for her feminist cause, which her peers viewed as an act of self-interest.
232. On behalf of our department, Gil is going to make a speech.
Speaking of which, I've been told he will be promoted to Deputy General Manager.
233. I was intensely irritated. I was in a hurry but got caught in a traffic jam. As is often the case, that particular intersection was under repair again. 234.
UFO stands for Unidentified Flying Object. It is defined in this dictionary as a saucer-like vehicle which some people claim they have seen.
235. The founder of the new religion delivered a passionate sermon about the worship of money, which he asserted was the root of all evil deeds. 236.
The riot police clashed with a violent mob who were protesting a Supreme Court ruling that they maintained was a gross injustice.
237. I feel pity for the kids I see on the street who are suffering extreme poverty. I wonder what they've got to look forward to in the future. 238.
Heredity is the biological process by which features are passed on from parents to their offspring through the genes.
But I don't look like Mom or Dad. 239. The Vivid film is based on the autobiography of a merchant who lived through the Reign of Terror in which innumerable people were slaughtered. 240.
The solar system to which planets like Earth and Mars, asteroids and comets belong was formed approximately 4.5 billion years ago.
241. Notwithstanding her knee injury, the gymnast gave a perfect performance, for which the spectators rose to their feet and applauded loudly. 242.
Now, that supervisor is being well-mannered, but he might sexually harass women workers again, in which case he will be severely punished.
243. After graduating from a provincial college, I returned to the Big Apple, where I became acquainted with a bunch of outstanding yet eccentric artists. 244.
A teacher whose name I've forgotten would often say, "There will no doubt come a time when you'll regret not having studied more diligently in school."
245. I'm new to Tokyo. Yesterday, when I was going to Shinjuku, I changed trains at Tokyo Station and, by mistake, got on one bound for Chiba. 246.
The weather forecaster added, "And this is the 10th day in a row that the maximum temperature has exceeded 35 degrees Celsius."
247.
Now that I'm an adult, I don't want you to interfere in my affairs. I don't want my life intruded on by anybody, for that matter.
248. Every time he is in trouble, he does not hesitate to turn to me for assistance, and yet he is always reluctant to return the favor. 249.
The instant the signal turned green, Al started to cross the road. I grabbed him by the collar and told him to look both ways and watch out for cars.
250. I worked late and got home around midnight. I was so worn out and sleepy that the moment I lay down on the couch, I fell asleep. 251. I can see no reason why we should go on strike. Most union members are in favor of the compromise proposal put forward by the management. 252.
The reason the meek and shy girl always looked gloomy was because she was constantly teased and bullied by her mean stepsisters.
253. The sociology lecturer explained to us that ways of thinking differ from culture to culture in the same way that ways of living vary from place to place. 254.
I was preparing supper and didn't mean to scare him, but the way I stared at him with a kitchen knife in my hand frightened him.
255. For all his fame and fortune, the billionaire is not completely satisfied with the way things have turned out. He dislikes the lack of privacy, for one thing. 256. The night before the university entrance examination, I was all too anxious and couldn't get to sleep till the small hours of the morning. 257.
When I was looking for my son's report card the day before yesterday, I came across photographs of nude women in the bottom drawer of his desk.
258.
It smells delicious, Tom said, and just as he reached for a slice, his mother slapped him on the wrist and said, "You must be patient."
259. The orphan lived with a succession of foster parents until he was adopted by a middle-aged couple who couldn't have children of their own. 260. It's useless to look to him for leadership because he is rather timid and slow to make up his mind. We'd better not leave this matter to him. 261.
Since there's no lime available for the time being, we've got to either make do with vinegar or just do without. It won't make much difference anyway.
262.
Capitalism, as opposed to socialism or communism, is believed to have a favorable effect on the economy in that it promotes efficiency through competition.
263. Colonel Sanders looked me in the eye and said, "If you persist in ignoring my commands, I'll be obliged to transfer you somewhere else." 264. Deep in thought, the captain murmured, "Even if we conserve our food, it will only be sufficient to sustain us for 2 weeks at most." 265.
In the event of a big earthquake, be sure to turn off the gas immediately, and don't leave the building unless you are otherwise instructed.
266. The savage ruler said, "As far as I'm concerned, you can adopt whatever means you like, as long as it attains our primary objective." 267. In case I forget, do remind me to mail this. I suffer from a loss of memory these days. As you grow older, your memory is apt to fail. 268. What if we get lost on the way? I suggest taking a sleeping bag and some extra food with us just in case. We can't be too cautious. 269.
I will now demonstrate how to take it apart and put it together so that you can do it yourself from now on. I'll do it twice so that you won't forget it.
270. If I am not able to attend the banquet, I'll phone you in advance so you can arrange for someone else to take my place. 271. To relieve our anxiety, the manager told us, "Do as you please. If anything should go wrong, I'll take full responsibility for it." 272.
It's a shame indeed that while we have more food than we can consume, a great many people are starving to death in the third world.
273. Some of those present demanded that wearing seatbelts be made compulsory by law, whereas others insisted that it remain voluntary. 274. Where there is a will, there is a way.
I'm not sure what it means.
In other words, you can achieve whatever goal you have. 275. Although the situation called for swift action, we were at a loss as to what to do, for none of us had anticipated a calamity of that magnitude. 276.
Even though he hates studying and skips virtually every lecture, he is unwilling to quit school simply because he prefers school to work.
277. You are to be back by 11 o'clock at the latest, whether you like it or not. It doesn't matter where you go and what you do, so long as you behave yourself. 278. I'm filled with misgiving, the senior senator observed. In general, the youth of today, whether at home or abroad, are utterly indifferent to politics. 279. He bumped my car against a lamppost? How clumsy of him! No matter what he does, he is careless and awkward.
I wonder who he takes after.
280.
No matter how abundant natural resources may seem, they are limited and bound to be exhausted, so why don't we utilize them sensibly?
281. Beaming with goodwill, the amiable missionary called, "All contributions, however small, will be much appreciated. Every bit counts." 282.
I'm certain he will make an ideal business partner. He never makes a vague promise, and once he does make a promise, he is certain to keep it.
283. A blunt-spoken fortune-teller predicted that on the whole we would have a stormy year and encounter a good deal of misfortune. 284.
Do you foresee an end to this crisis?
Certainly. I see a ray of hope on the horizon, and I will steer the tribe toward it. 285.
Do me a favor, will you?
That depends. What is it?
Will you turn the music down while I'm on the phone? I have to shout to make myself heard.
286.
Would you leave me alone? I must concentrate on my work.
Don't disturb her, John. She's in the middle of exam week.
I'll go study in the library.
287. Will you be paying by cash or credit card? Asked the hotel clerk. The guest answered, "Cash, please. On second thought, I'll pay by check." 288. We're holding Vicky's farewell party at 2 p.m. on May 20th. I'm going to give you a ride to her apartment.
Hold on a minute. I'll write it down before I forget.
289.
Look at those dark clouds. It looks like we're going to have a thunder shower.
Let's get this done quickly and make for the nearest shelter. 290. Screaming loudest of all, Jenny clung tightly to Tom's sleeve and wouldn't let go.
That's typical of her. She pretended to be frightened.
291. How can you be so stupid? He snarled. I cannot make out why you were taken in by such a transparent lie. You should be ashamed of yourself. 292.
The hijacker seized 30 hostages and threatened to kill them, but an FBI agent was somehow able to persuade him into setting them free.
293. It's a legitimate transaction, not illegal by any means.
That's correct, but it could adversely affect the relationship we have maintained with our clients.
294.
I had the impression that he was in his 30s, but he turned out to be 24.
No kidding. He could pass for 35. He looks old for his age. 295. I would say the beauty of democracy lies in the fact that everyone has a say in how they are governed.
So it does. I couldn't agree more.
296. Jones notified the executives of his intention to retire. Perhaps Brown will take over.
I couldn't care less. It's none of my business.
297. I sensed discouragement beneath his artificial smile, so I consoled him by saying, Never mind, it couldn't be helped. It could have been a lot worse. 298.
Who's calling, please?
This is John Miller of ABC. May I speak to Miss Smith?
I'm sorry, her line is busy now. Shall I have her call you back?
299. Do you have the time?
It's 6:45.
He must be home by now. Why not drop by his place and say hello?
Yeah, why not?
300. It's evident Charlie is crazy about my cousin Cindy.
You've got to be kidding. Clearly that can't be right, because he loves me.
301. The vending machine is out of order again. I bet it's defective.
I suppose we should tell the manufacturer to replace it with a new one.
302. After the operation to remove the tumor, the surgeon said, the patient should be restored to good health in a month or so. 303.
The unusual notion may have struck many of you as absurd and out of the question. In a sense, however, it is totally rational and coherent.
304. There's a pile of scattered trash, empty bottles, cans, and plastic bags.
Some people must have had a party or something.
305. It seems that these outdated regulations have long hindered the progress of the distribution industry. We should have done away with them long ago. 306. Shortly afterward, Dave confided, Between you and me, I didn't dare tell the truth for fear that I would be held responsible for it. 307. Sid recalled, aside from all types of social oppression, we all had to contend with obstinate ignorance and prejudice. 308.
That corrupt politician is to be appointed cabinet minister.
This appointment is likely to give rise to a fierce controversy among the general public. 309.
I saw him off at the wharf. I kept waving until he was out of sight. By a strange twist of fate, I was never to see him again.
310. I advise you to keep away from them. I tell you they are not to be trusted.
On the contrary, they would be the last people to deceive you. I have faith in them.
311. It is absolutely vital to reconcile freedom with basic discipline in raising your child. If you indulge him too much, you will spoil him. 312.
I was fed up with school because if I was conspicuous, I was excluded from the activities of my group.
That's true of our society as a whole. 313.
I wonder if this painting is a genuine Van Gogh.
I don't think so. It's a fake, that's for sure. If it were real, it wouldn't be in an obscure hotel like this. 314.
If I were you, I would make better use of it, Betty suggested. Amy reacted with rage. Mind your own business. It has nothing to do with you.
315. Matt didn't bother to hide his anger. If it weren't for the fact that he is senior to me, I'd punch him in the face and pour this coffee on his bald head. 3:16.
The last train was due in 20 minutes, and I made it to the station just in time to catch it. If I had missed it, I would have had to take a taxi home.
3:17. The vice president said, "If it hadn't been for that extraordinary PC boom, we couldn't have expanded our modest enterprise into a multimedia giant." 3:18.
If he had consulted a better specialist, he would still be alive.
What do you say to charging him with malpractice?
He would never acknowledge it.
3:19. The literary critic remarked, "If I were asked how I felt when I happened to read his novel, I could compare it to love at first sight." 3:20.
We ought not to tolerate excessive packaging. If we were to put an end to this wasteful practice, we would be able to reduce both cost and garbage.
3:21. We had to undergo a major transformation, during which scores of people were laid off, but without such a restructuring effort, we couldn't have survived. 3:22.
I cautioned him. It would be imprudent, not to say foolish, to rely on your instincts and intuition all the time. You ought to use your common sense.
3:23. The economist warned, a partial treatment for the serious but stable condition would do the economy more harm than good. 3:24.
Not knowing the appropriate manners for the formal occasion, I felt so embarrassed that I could have sunk into the floor.
3:25.
Now and then the would-be painter sighs and wishes he were endowed with an artistic talent for painting masterpieces like Renoir's.
3:26. I wish I hadn't lost my temper and said such a nasty thing to her, Don lamented. I wish she would forgive me. 3:27.
Would it be all right if I used your mobile phone?
By all means. Let's see. There it is. It's in the right-hand corner next to the TV set. 3:28. The note said, "I'd be grateful if you would promptly deliver the commodities listed below, along with the usual goods." 3:29.
I wonder if you could help me with my homework. I'm really stuck. No matter how I read it, this paragraph doesn't seem to make sense.
3:30. Do you mind if I smoke? I asked. She cleared her throat and replied, "I'd rather you didn't. Honestly, I have an allergy to cigarette smoke." 3:31.
She looked as if she were about to burst into tears, when all at once she burst out laughing, as though she had gone mad.
3:32.
It was a decade before the superpower got over the shock of losing the war, and it took even longer for the psychological scars to heal.
3:33. It has been 10 years since we set about extending this road to the city center, but as it is, it will probably be another 2 years before we complete it. 3:34. He proclaimed, "Terrorism is a great threat to world peace. It is time the international community cooperated in eliminating it once and for all." 3:35.
In spite of her annoyance, Miss Ford scolded the mischievous pupil mildly by saying, "It is high time you learned to tell right from wrong."
3:36. Financial institutions invested heavily in property. With land prices soaring, it was extremely difficult to resist the temptation of easy profits. 3:37.
The two plants look exactly alike. Thus, it would be all but impossible for someone other than a botanical expert to distinguish one from the other.
3:38.
It was so thoughtful of you to send me the money. You saved my life. I'm much obliged.
Don't mention it. It was the least I could do. 3:39. There is no use wailing about past failures. It's no use crying over spilled milk.
You're right. Let's face up to the harsh reality and make the best of it.
3:40. It was worthwhile my taking the trouble to apply for a local authority grant. I was awarded as much as $2,000 by the city council. 3:41. It was silly of me, but I took it for granted that she was content with her life. It never occurred to me that she would be full of dissatisfaction. 3:42.
It is said that this unique tradition is related to that sacred custom, and each dates back to medieval times and ancient times, respectively.
343. No wonder the negotiation broke down. To begin with, our representatives are not good at bargaining with tough negotiators. 344.
We have it from a reliable source that, owing to a long drought and famine, the isolated country is in need of outside support, including food aid.
345. Conventional wisdom has it that labor productivity rises in proportion to incentives offered, such as bonus payments and speedy promotion. 346.
Bureaucrats argued that it was desirable, if not essential, that the proposition be examined in minute detail before they proceeded any further.
347. It is only natural that we should be afraid of gangsters, because they think nothing of resorting to violence in order to resolve disputes. 348.
It was during this time in the Heian period that aristocrats lived in luxury and enjoyed wealth and privilege to their heart's content.
349.
In my family, it's my mom who wears the pants, so to speak.
In mine, it's my dad who calls the shots. He's in charge of everything. 350.
The gifted poet stood out in her youth, and yet it wasn't until she turned 30 that her sophisticated poetry became widely recognized.
351. What is it that makes you so sure of yourself? You should know better than to confuse popularity with ability.
So, you're jealous of my success after all.
352.
With a depressed expression on her face, she wondered out loud. Why was it that he abruptly began neglecting his work and eventually abandoned us?
353. It's disgusting the way they exploit and discriminate against the weak. I insist that you take immediate action to correct the situation. 354.
It seemed as if my work associates refrained from criticizing me on account of my being within hearing distance.
355. The scandals surrounding the ambassador forced him to resign. It looks as if his brilliant career as an elite diplomat is as good as over. 356. You look pale. What's the matter?
I don't have any appetite. Neither the oily food nor the humid heat here agrees with me.
You will adjust in a while. 357.
You can hardly assess intelligence from tests. Therefore, just because you get bad grades, it doesn't necessarily follow you are intellectually inferior.
358. There is hardly any doubt that their ambiguous reply is meant to delay the signing of the contract on purpose and extract more favorable terms from us. 359.
I share the housework with Betty, so I hardly ever do the laundry, and she rarely, if ever, does the dishes or the cleaning.
360. You ought to have an eye for information. Just as not every postage stamp is worthy of collection, not all information is worth gathering. 361.
A literary work translated into a foreign language does not always convey the subtle nuances contained in the original.
362. The girl's story is so pathetic. I can't read it without being moved to tears.
Neither can I. I can't read the last episode without crying.
363. Jeff is fond of boasting. People occasionally fail to retain their self-control, but in my case, reason never fails to prevail over emotion. 364.
The last thing the Christians and the Muslims wanted to do was ruin the fragile peace accord they had signed the previous year.
365. More haste, less speed. This expression is a paradox, not an irony. Though both may sound similar, they are anything but the same. 366.
I despise that man. He is sarcastic. Besides, he does nothing but find fault with us.
You can say that again. I have nothing but scorn for him, too. 367. His response was one of ridicule. I don't believe in that superstition. It's ridiculous. It has no solid scientific basis. There is no concrete proof. 368.
Incredible. It's beyond belief. Betty says she fell in love with Jack, the coward.
As the saying goes, there is no accounting for taste. 369.
This is how the moral story begins. Once upon a time, there lived a friendly, good-natured man and a cunning, narrow-minded neighbor.
370. Ahead of the post-Soviet republics lay a multitude of conflicts and frictions arising from profound mutual hatred and hostility. 371.
I hold interpreters in high esteem. I envy their impressive command of more than one language.
So do I. I can't help but admire them. 372.
I entered the kitchen and turned on the electric heater, but hardly had I switched on the microwave oven when all the lights went out.
373. No sooner had he gotten out of the limo than aggressive reporters rushed forward in force and asked him if he had taken bribes, but he declined to comment. 374.
Should you find our service useful, further information can be obtained by contacting our office. Please feel free to email or telephone us.
375. Why he acted like that, I don't know.
Ray has a double personality. As a rule, he is polite and gentle, but he can be rude and coarse from time to time.
376. Scratching his head, the section chief told me, I regret to say that ingenious though your method is, it can scarcely be regarded as practical. 377. The warrior was captured and tortured. Being forced as he was to beg for mercy, he nevertheless held himself back, thinking it would only humiliate him. 378.
In the trial, the judge passed a light sentence on the accused, taking into account the fact that he had had an unhappy childhood.
379. The unexpected disaster brought home to us the reality that it is one thing to devise a splendid plan and quite another to put it into practice. 380.
The experienced counselor urged the worried mother to keep in mind that resistance to parents is an inevitable part of growing up.
381.
I'm exhausted.
I beg your pardon?
I'm tired, so let's call it a day.
No way! We mustn't put off till tomorrow what we can do today. 382.
Sleep is to the brain what food is to the body. That is to say, if deprived of adequate sleep, the brain cannot function properly.
383. It appears that fresh evidence has lately come to light which suggests that the witness's testimony in court may have been made up. 384.
Jack's account of what occurred and why was concise and precise. In contrast, Andy's was redundant and not quite accurate.
385. If the recession drags on, wages will be frozen or lowered.
I hope not. Wage earners and salaried workers alike already find it hard to make ends meet.
386. An estimate submitted by a think tank indicated that by 2002, the budget deficit would amount to 430 trillion yen and the trade surplus $130 billion. 387.
The products made of this type of vinyl have one negative feature in common. They give off poisonous gas, namely dioxin, if burnt at low temperatures.
388. When interviewed, he blamed the lost match on the umpire's decision. To put it bluntly, I was defeated by the umpire, not by my opponent. 389.
It goes without saying that children, as well as grown-ups, have fundamental human rights, as stated and guaranteed in the Constitution.
390.
One of the principles on which our judicial system is founded is the assumption that one is presumed innocent until proven guilty.
391. He complained, we have some rigid rules to observe while on duty. For instance, we are strictly prohibited from smoking and eating. 392.
Make sure you bend your legs when lifting a heavy load. Otherwise, you are liable to injure your back muscles by putting too much strain on them.
393. Following two fighter planes, a majestic bomber called the B-59 took off and gained velocity and altitude as if defying the law of gravity. 394.
If possible, I'd like you to postpone your arrival. Right now, my office is in a state of total chaos.
All right, if necessary, I'll change the date. 395. I have a hangover. My head is pounding. At the reunion last night, I had such a good time that I ended up drinking more than I should. 396.
Nowadays, people, especially urbanites, are much more sensitive to environmental issues than they were in the past, say, in the early 90s.
397. Tell me your candid opinion. In what respect are they superior to us?
In terms of brand image and, above all, variety of merchandise.
398.
In a quivering voice, the widow dwelt at length on the physical and emotional sufferings her husband endured prior to his death.
399. The flu epidemic broke out in one of the most densely populated regions on the equator, and consequently, hundreds of people perished. 400.
The energy generated by the sun is good for the environment. Moreover, it is the least costly alternative energy source.
401. The mountaineer strove to fulfill his ambition to climb K2, the second highest mountain in the world, and he achieved it in 1900. 402.
Although it was a superb opera, it didn't attract as large an audience as I had expected. It may be that opera is no longer a profitable proposition.
403. The geography teacher taught us that the delta of the Mississippi was more subject to floods than any other area in the States. 404.
Grieving and sobbing, she said, "Nothing was more precious than my baby. No amount of money will ever compensate for the agony of losing him."
405. I'll introduce you to Dan, the elder twin of the two. He is the town's most eligible bachelor. I'm sure you'll come to like him as you get to know him. 406.
There were both positive and negative aspects to the proposed scheme, but as usual, they exaggerated the former and concealed the latter.
407.
I took revenge on my ex-boyfriend by informing his wife of our love affair, but I felt none the better for it. In fact, I felt all the more miserable.
408. The more I thought about the enormous size of the assignment, the less confident I became that I could get it done by the deadline. 409.
People are becoming more and more health conscious, and an increasing number of people are altering their eating habits with a view to prolonging their lives.
410.
Her hand was trembling as she removed the dead insect. I can barely stand the sight of bugs, worms, and the like, much less touch them.
411. The popular actor shows no signs of conceit and arrogance. He is no more arrogant than he was when he made his debut in his late teens. 412. The historic treaty was condemned as, at best, a feeble concession, and, at worst, a thorough submission to the colonial powers. 413.
How come those guys are so keen on football?
Beats me, but all things considered, it's not so much an enthusiasm as an obsession. 414. Despite the fact that the enemy was twice as powerful as we were, our brave troops, determined to defend our homeland, refused to surrender or retreat. 415.
It takes no more than an hour to fly to the top of the peninsula, but it takes 5 times as long to get there by train and 10 times longer by ship.
416.
Immigrants make up a quarter of the population of this province, and the people we call guest workers account for a third of its workforce.
417. This industrial country imports roughly 2/3 of the raw materials it needs and exports approximately 2/5 of the machinery it produces. 418.
My mother was inclined to approve of my younger sister's marriage to a man twice her age, while my stubborn father wouldn't consent to it.
419. This micromotor is less than 1/20th the size of a rice grain, hence invisible to the naked eye. You need a microscope to see it.